Hi everybody, I'm Girl Writes What, and a perplexed viewer recently messaged me to ask me if I would maybe do a video on sexual objectification, after he stumbled across two internet brouhahas that just kind of had him scratching his head. In the first one, an atheist blogger who writes about ethics posted a list of sexy scientists who happened to all be female, other than P.Z. Myers, who was added as a joke. He was immediately taken to task for compiling a sexist list that objectified women based on their looks. My viewer found the level of anger among those chastising this blogger to be kind of stunning, and noticed that the blogger had to repeatedly correct some commenters' blatant misrepresentations of things that he'd said. But what really got him wondering, what the fuck, was how so many of those people who were offended to their cores by that list came out and admitted explicitly that such a list featuring sexy male scientists wouldn't be offensive to them. He sent me another example of this phenomenon he'd found on Jezebel, where many of the women there were shamelessly objectifying male soccer players, and a few other women said things like, "If the World Cup featured women, we'd all be pissed about the objectification. This is not any different." The response was, "Yeah, we'd be pissed about it, but it's not the same. Here's why. In our current universe, men do not have trouble being taken seriously based on their looks or perceived sexiness, nor is their worth in society primarily judged by them. It also won't contribute to the overall oppression of men. They will not be treated like meat or chattel. Period." My viewer asked me to kindly try to explain to him what planet these people were living on. And first of all, as I try to explain what planet they are living on, I want to just let everybody know that my conclusions in this video are really my conjectures based on things that I've read and things that I've observed in real life, and really it's one person's opinion. I'm going to first say that these people kind of are living on a planet where they don't know or understand, or just don't want to understand how sex works. I'm going to quote a favorite sex columnist of mine, Dan Savage, because his ideas about sexual objectification dovetail really neatly with my own, and he says it much more humorously than I would. He says, "Face facts, ladies. People always have and always will objectify the people they are attracted to. Men who want to fuck women objectify women at places like Hooters. Women who want to fuck men objectify men at places like Centerfolds. Gay men objectify other men at places like Ashton Kutcher's ass crack. Lesbians objectify other women at places where Venus and Serena play tennis. The urge to objectify is universal, and so long as it's fairly and respectfully indulged, it's not offensive, not a problem, and not news." I would also have to say that these people are living on a planet where everyone lacks the hardwiring and software required to view women as having any active role in anything other than as passive beings that stuff, including everything concerning sexuality, just happens to, which is pretty much par for the course. I've mentioned before that feminism seems to be the biggest objectifier of women out there, and this bullshit provides me with a convenient way to explain my reasoning to the uninitiated. At its heart, objectification is a denial of personal or moral agency. Agency is the idea that the things you do have an effect on the world and on yourself. That your action A will result in outcome B or C or D, depending what your action A was. That the outcome actually depends on your action. When people are seen as objects, they're seen as incapable of effectual decisions or actions that actually lead to outcomes. It's basically like saying nothing you do matters because shit just happens to you. Objectification is the primary method for any kind of group politics that are based on group victimhood. Once you have said that this group of people are victims, you are treating them as objects, not agents. I mean, to someone like Rebecca Watson, posing in a Sexy Women of Skepticism calendar should have no bearing on how anyone sees or thinks of her. She may be showing tons of cleavage all the time and cashing in on her sex appeal, but at the same time she lives in a universe where even as she exploits her sexuality, she denies it has or should have any effect on anyone, and woe betide the evil man who might fap to still images of her looking coyly into the camera with an acre of boobage on display because he's not acknowledging her as a human being. Perhaps he is allowed to fap to an audio track of her talking about feminism with her voice electronically altered to conceal her gender, but I wouldn't bet on it. Masturbating to thoughts of anyone you do not know on a deep spiritual or intellectual level is the purest evil there is. Unless you're a woman rubbing one off to images of David Beckham. Which brings me to the other half of the sexual objectification equation. You know, the one feminists have never heard of or thought about because they're too busy admiring their own vaginas in a completely non-objectifying way, unlike you disgusting men who are only interested in sex. Pigs. So, let's look at the whole picture based on the criteria of sexual attractiveness with respect to men and women. And yes, I'm speaking in generalizations. And the intellectual dishonesty in people like the commenters at Common Sense Atheism and Jezebel. Women will spend hours a day sometimes turning themselves into beautiful and sexy objects. They wear high heels because small feet correlate with high estrogen levels and therefore fertility, and feet look smaller in high heels. Legs also look longer in them, which correlates with youth, and because those high heels cause the lower back to arch, they make a woman's bum look a lot more alluring. Women wear lipstick because women's lips are naturally darker and fuller than men's to mimic women's genitals, and lipstick enhances that effect. They dye their hair to hide grays and use wrinkle creams that give the illusion of youth, and they agonize over acne because clear skin indicates health and good genes to potential mates. They may not do any of this consciously, knowing why it works, but they do it because they know it's sexy. And they are more likely to do all of these things when they go out in the world, where there are lots of men to look at them, and then live in sweatpants and yesterday's makeup around their significant other, the man they supposedly want to be attractive to, or when they're alone at home. So they are indeed doing it for the male attention, and not to just feel sexy. It's basically like putting out a broadcast, but hoping only the most fit and acceptable guys will receive and act on the signal. This is an action, ladies, and it results in an outcome. The outcome is that you are now more sexually attractive to men you don't know and who don't know shit about you as a person, and contrary to what you'd like to believe, that is the outcome you were going for. And the retarded idea that men are not objectified and judged based on sexual criteria, it just shows that feminists have never been able to put themselves in men's experience, or even to understand how their own brains work. What are the sexy poses for women? The ones that show superficial indications of qualities men find attractive, poses that emphasize curves, fertility and childbearing capability, facial expressions that are coy or coquettish, pleasant disposition, angles that display beauty, good genes, clear skin, health, and long legs, youth. The nakeder the better, because a man's visually detectable criteria for what is sexually attractive in women is based on her body. Now, what are the sexy poses for men? Action poses, strength and power poses, work poses, rebellious or defiant poses. And if all those men are all the way naked, then you can't actually see that they can afford that Hugo Boss suit, or what kind of work they do, or whether they're in some kind of uniform, or what kind of social status they have. Can you? Men are sexy to women because of what they can bring to the table in the way of protection, social status, and resources. Men's poses reflect that, and just because they're all based on what men can do or have or can get or earn, doesn't mean they aren't objectifying, and it does not mean that men are not judged based on those visual criteria. I read once that a woman decides within 5 seconds of looking at a man whether she wants to get to know him better, and a lot of the time, that decision is based on things like the quality of his shoes. And while it might suck to be objectified based on your looks, when your looks aren't something you can easily change, it must also suck to be objectified based on how much you bring to the table in performance standards, essentially objectified based on your utility to a given woman. But however much it might suck to be objectified in that way, you don't really hear the kind of moaning and caterwauling over the sexual objectification of men that we always seem to hear over the slightest hint of the sexual objectification of women. The difference is not that men have male privilege. It's that men who are unable to be seen as sexual objects by women because they fail to meet those criteria are seen as losing out, while women who are objectified usually feel threatened. And all of that can be attributed to the differing biological costs and benefits of sex depending on whether you're a man or a woman. For the sake of argument, let's just pretend that we're living 20,000 years ago, before the pill and abortion and slut walks and the sexual revolution and the influx of women into the paid workforce and all of that. Because 20,000 years ago is the environment that our instincts think we're living in. Unwanted sexual attention, that is, subpar men or men who haven't been vetted ogling a woman, feels threatening to a woman because the biological cost, pregnancy, of that attraction carried too far, rape, is extremely high. Getting pregnant by a subpar man was a biological disaster for a woman. She'd waste one of her finite timed shots at the reproductive target, risk her life and health, and might have 4 years of decreased fertility from breastfeeding before she'd be able to try again. All of it thrown away on a subpar child sired by a man who at the very least hadn't proven to her in advance that he'd stick around and help her raise it. That's a huge set of risks and costs. So unwanted sexual attention from a man she feels doesn't measure up makes her uneasy. But she can't get any sexual attention at all, even from the men she does or might want, unless she presents herself as a sexually attractive woman, can she? So when she's applying all that makeup and pulling on that snug t-shirt, she's instinctively, but maybe not consciously, aware of why she's doing it, to be attractive to an awesome guy, which will make her feel sexy. But when non-awesome or non-vetted men express unwanted or premature interest in her, she's made uncomfortable. And rather than face that conflict, she buries it under an illogical tangle of rationalization wherein she deems men should not objectify her even when men objectifying her was her goal, and wherein none of it has anything to do with her or anything she does or is. It's all the fault of those men and the dicks they're led around by. This is one of the reasons why male behavior around women has always been bound by strict rules of courtesy, and why even as recently as my grandfather's time, a man could get his lights punched out for offending a woman by using vulgar language in her presence. And it's why women are still the group with the most power and to control discourse and rules of politeness. They set the limits of what is acceptable speech and behavior, and pretty much everyone caters to their lowest common denominator of comfort level. Now, on the flip side, because of those female costs and risks, men have to compete to be worthy to get a shot at reproducing. But 20,000 years ago, if he had sex with a subpar female, one that he wouldn't be interested in hanging out with long term, he lost nothing other than a few million sperm that regenerate constantly. He could, at least until recently, just walk away, no loss, no foul, and try again with someone better the moment he could spring another boner. And for him, being objectified is a good thing. He has to compete for females, remember? Being objectified is success, and success makes him a winner, even if he doesn't end up having sex with any of the women making eyes at him across the cave. So he doesn't make a big deal about being found sexy. Being found sexy by many women costs him nothing, and can only pay off more the more women objectify him, because then he might actually get to have his pick of women, rather than the other way around. And none of this means that men want sex all the time, or for many different women, or anything like that. It just means they aren't going to have that visceral, instinctive uneasiness around an appreciative gaze from a woman they don't know. And even if he has no interest in women, or sex, or reproducing, the things that make him a sexy object are things that will make his life awesome as an individual. Money, self-sufficiency, respect, physical fitness, and the admiration of others. Even if he doesn't ever want sex, any of women's sexual criteria he meets are of benefit to him as an individual. Up until very recently in our social and legal evolution, he didn't face the conflict that what makes him valuable sexually is also a huge, potentially life-ruining liability if his sexual judgment led him astray, or if a woman took advantage of him. Women have always had all the power in the sexual equation, but up until an eye blink ago, it was a power that could utterly destroy them if they weren't able to exercise total control over it. And even if they don't consciously understand that, their instincts do. Men have always had to earn their sexual power, and it was a power that once they had it, cost them nothing biologically. It was the getting it that used to cost them a fuck ton, often their lives, as they performed their way into proving themselves valuable enough to lease a woman's uterus. Now, what really gets me is how completely oblivious to most feminists are to things like this, how they will deny the agency women exercise when they objectify themselves, by shifting all the onus onto men to effectively gouge their own metaphorical eyes out, or else they're being pigs, rather than acknowledging the part women play in the game of sexual attraction. And the cognitive dissonance of saying something like, men will not be treated like meat, even while they are talking about men like they're pieces of meat. It really gets me that instead of understanding that their problem with the problem of sexual objectification of women originates in instincts that served women in the fucking cave, but have nothing to do with the social, technological, legal, or economic realities of today, feminists will perform the pathetic intellectual gymnastics required to blame their own double standards on the collective delusion of male privilege, so that they don't have to admit that women are instinctively cautious about sex and men instinctively cavalier about it. And what I find most hilarious is the denial that women objectify men based on criteria they can determine with their eyes alone. All the cues and signals so obvious in sexy images of men that showcase their utility to women, and that can be as simple as the way he's standing when the shutter clicks. If women are objectified as ornaments, then men are objectified as appliances. And the difference between an ornament and an appliance is that ornaments are coveted objects prone to theft by the unworthy, while appliances that no one wants get hauled to the dump. A woman objectified by the wrong man feels uneasy because once upon a time her reproductive costs and risks could cost her everything, while a man objectified by a woman was actually deferring his disposability. And I can even see that little nugget of truth in the lament of a 50-year-old attractive businesswoman who claims it's been ages since a strange man gave her the look. Leering hasn't happened in years, she says wistfully. Visiting Italy 20 years ago with friends, she says, we were furious that the Italian men pinched your bum. When we went back in our early 40s, we were furious that no one was pinching our bums. She's now discovering what men understand right from the get-go, that being objectified by others is proof of your sexual market value, which is why young women go to such lengths to make themselves beautiful, even as they scold men who dare to notice. And though none of this instinctive bullshit, as I've presented it, can be changed on the fundamental level of limbic hardwiring, I really think knowing what the fuck we're dealing with here and why it exists is the first step to actually dealing with the issue. If women want to be seen as sexual agents in this age where most of the reproductive risks and costs to them have been mitigated by modern technology, they have to stop denying they have sexual agency. And they really need to grow a pair and talk themselves out of behaving like they live in the goddamn Victorian age, where women were so at the mercy of their biological vulnerability that a double entendre from the wrong man could earn him a beating. Because it might come as a shock to a lot of people, but we don't live there anymore. In this reality, in this environment, with women's fertility on total lockdown if they so desire, and men facing legally enforceable $100,000 baby mortgages when they have an oops, our instincts are actually diametrically opposed to our current relative risks and costs. And all this female kvetching over a few appreciative glances, or the thought that a guy you wouldn't have anything to do with might be jerking off with an image of your tits in his mind, it all needs to stop. If feminism wants women to be taken as seriously as men's equals, then it's women who are going to have to do the adjusting for a change. And that means not calling for her smelling salts whenever some guy tells her she's pretty. Anyhow, that's all I have to say about that, at least for today. And hopefully I don't enrage too many people. But that's just kind of the way I see it, the way I look at the problem. and the reason why I think the double standard exists, and I think it's just fucking hilarious that feminists don't seem to get any of this. So anyhow, that's it for me for today. I will hopefully see you all next time.